I Heart by Daniel Johnson. Copyright 2020 by Renaissance.
Which century?
She continued to weep bitterly. Andre rushed back to see Sergeant Mills to tell him about Elizabeth's abduction by the evil sorceress of the real-world portal. Sergeant Mills listened to him patiently as he explained how he was teleported to a new world with Elizabeth, and an ugly sorceress had made Elizabeth disappear.
"I fear I may have acted too rashly,"
he said.
"I cast away the demon with my St. Christopher's medal."
He hit his fist to the side of his head.
"Oh, by Jove, I had no idea it would actually work," he said. "I was just trying to scare the crone, and now she has taken my Elizabeth to God knows what evil realm."
Mills began to laugh. Andre's face filled with disgust.
"You find that funny?"
he said.
"Do you mock me in my anguish?"
Mills raised his right hand.
"Easy there, laddie,"
He said,
"I'm nae mocking ye. There is much ye nae understand. Let's see if we can sort this thing out together and get you back to your Elizabeth."
Andre calmed down, and his face switched to a mixture of uncertainty and hope.
"What did you say when she told her that she was an ugly crone?"
"Well,"
he replied.
"that's the odd thing, you see. She did not say anything. She just stood there, and I'm not certain of this, but it looked like she was weeping."
"And that's when she disappeared, sure?"
Mills asked.
"Yes,
He said,
and the magical world we were both in melted away."
"Laddie,"
Mills said. Andre looked at him expectantly.
Now, how do I explain
As
this?
he said to himself,
a lot of this will be hard for ye to understand. Your Elizabeth is quite queer. She can take on several different forms.
You mean she's some sort of shapeshifter? Some type of doppelganger? You can hardly expect me to believe that. My Elizabeth is pure, not some evil demon."
Nay, she may be a demon, laddie.
Mills said reassuringly.
She's a lassie, sure, and she loves you, sure.
"What the?"
Andre asked.
She's more like an angel, but she does have different forms."
A look of realization filled Andre's face.
"Oh, I see.
He said,
How could I be so dense? My Elizabeth was testing me.
His voice began to grow in certainty and conviction.
She wanted to see if I loved her for who she is, not for her visage."
He looked at Mills directly.
"That's what it is, isn't it?"
Mills looked ambivalent, not knowing how to answer.
"Well?"
"Of course.
Andre said.
She was testing me. And I failed. By Jove, I failed the test."
He said, looking up. He looked over at Mills.
"I've lost her, haven't I?"
He said in a level voice. Mills paused a moment, then said,
"Perhaps nay, laddie.
Andre looked at him expectantly.
I think I can fix this mess."
He said, dropping his accent.
"You can?"
Andre said with a hopeful smile.
"Maybe."
"Oh, thank you, dearest Sergeant Mills, programmer god of the real world portal."
Andre said as his eyes filled with glee.
"You are indeed a true friend. I am forever in your debt."
Then Andre paused a moment and said,
"How? How will you do it?"
"A programmer god of the real world never reveals his secrets."
he said. So like any good programmer god of the real world portal would do, Sergeant Mills, alias Steve Miller, contacted Bethany in the real world. He explained a little what was going on, and Bethany agreed to meet him at a coffee shop a few blocks away from her flat. Oddly enough, Miller only lived about 30 miles away from her. It must have been the intervention of fate, he thought. The coffee shop was dimly lit and smelled of old wood mixed with coffee beans. There was a small bar with a couple of espresso machines and jars filled with coffee beans. Aside from the old man behind the counter, they were the only ones there. They sat at one of the small tables in the room.
"So, if this isn't her ladyship, Elizabeth Greystoke herself."
Bethany gave a wry smile.
It's Bethany. So what is this all about? How do you know Andre?
"Well, it's a long, peculiar story.
He noticed an air of impertinence building in her.
You know the game you play online?
Forgotten Lives?
Yeah, that's the one. Well, I play it too. Sergeant Malcolm Mills, at your service, lassie, he said, slipping back into his accent.
Beth's eyes now seemed more intent.
Well, I knew Andre well in the army in the Sudan. He came out of nowhere and spent a long time there with me. At first I thought he was an NPC, but after a while I noticed his character was too complex, so I thought there must be an actual person behind the roleplay.
He took a sip of his coffee.
This stuff is horrible. Well, anyway, all the time in the Sudan, no matter how rough things got, he kept talking about his beloved Elizabeth. I didn't think much of it at the time. It's a common theme for people in the army.
How often did he mention me?
All the time. Anyway, he cycled out and said he was going back to see you, I guess. I didn't hear from him for a while, but then he turns up, out of the blue, asking all kinds of questions about the real world, like it was something new to him.
Beth looked at Mills intently now.
Well, after talking to him for a while, it became clear that our Andre Watts really didn't know anything about the real world.
What do you mean?
What we have here is a self-actualized AI. Andre doesn't know anything about the real world because he's never been there. Beth looked at him confused. He is a very advanced, very sophisticated artificial intelligence. Somewhere along the line, by design or by interaction, he became self-actualized. He actually believes he is Andre because he is Andre. There is nothing else.
That's crazy.
Yes. I've been playing matchmaker between a sentient AI and a real woman.
What about our meeting in the portal?
I set that up. Bess looks at him suspiciously. I reprogrammed his tag so he could piggyback on my user ID.
You can do that?
Shh, he said, putting his finger to his lips. Let's just say I'm sort of a magician. Beth continued to listen. Anyway, the kid's crazy about you. None of this outside world portal stuff makes any sense to him. One thing is sure, he's head over heels in love with you.
He loves Elizabeth.
She said coldly. And who is Elizabeth? She paused and her eyes began to glisten.
I love him too.
Soon Elizabeth was sitting on a tartan blanket under the shade of a large oak tree. A gentle breeze rippled through the waters of the clear blue pond. Only one geese milled around the shore. Would you like some lemonade, dear? The man asked in a deep voice.
Yes, Andre, that will be splendid.
She said, as she looked over at the man she became so fond of.
You have been listening to I Heart You by Daniel Johnson. Copyright 2020 by Renaissance Productions. For this and other writings, go to genesis2112.com or search Sue Lee Daniel Johnston on Kindle, iBooks, or Barnes & Noble. You have been listening to I Heart You by Daniel Johnson. Copyright 2020 by Renaissance Productions. For this and other writings, go to genesis2112.com or search Sue Lee Daniel Johnston on Kindle, iBooks, or Barnes & Noble.